Now we'll turn to this question 11 in one moment, but we'll look at the parts of question 10 that were assigned. Now here you can see that you're given a bunch of information about to compute some of the ratios, return on assets, margin, and so forth. You're given the numbers in green, and again, if you load this spreadsheet, you'll load it and it'll have all these blanks right here. Now for each one of these ratios, it's just going to be, since everything is all kind of laid out for you already, you just divide one by the other, and you can see there's a minus 7.5 there, and you can use that same formula, put that there, and you can see that your return on net assets took a gigantic nosedive. Last year was up at 42, and now it's... And I'll leave in the worksheet the percentage change calculations, so those formulas already work. And we can just look at, let's say, one other pair to see if anything. Now, see, there's another big swing. And if you look at the relative size of each one of the components, while the net assets didn't change much from one year to the other, they're both about 9 million. Your change in assets definitely went wildly off. It went from a 4 million increase to almost a million decrease. So it looks like this was a bad year in a lot of ways. And indeed, if we just take that and calculate, move that down to the total margin, which is, think of that as your total profit. Last year was a gravy year. We made a ton of money, about 51%, whereas this year we had a loss of about 20%, which is gigantic. Now scrolling down, we can do the same ratios. Indeed, those formulas work just as well here. So we can do the same ratios on that quick ratio and the debt to equity ratio. And again, you see a drastic swing in these liquidity ratios, going from a good position to not a good position. Indeed, going back to what the chapter said, this quick ratio is a critical ratio if you just use common sense. Current liabilities is bills due and bills due. Cash and short-term securities is how much money you have. Last year it was close to 1. It was still below 1, but it meant we had most of what we needed to cover our expenses. And you can see that difference right there. We had that much to owe, and we had that much in the bank, so it's a little bit close. We have to borrow a little bit of money, but we can get by. Whereas this year, it's much worse. We have 1.2 million in debts and only about half of that in securities. So you can look at all the other ratios, but in terms of most critical, this would be the one right here, this quick ratio. This is, if a patient came in, this is the equivalent of having to stop the bleeding before you worry about anything else. And in this case, with this quick ratio, they're basically in very dire situation, and until this is fixed, a lot of the other problems won't be as critical. And then if I was to summarize this condition, well, I just kind of tipped my hand there. The most critical problem is their ability to pay short-term debts. We can worry about all the other stuff later, but we've got to figure out how to do this one first. This is the whole problem. In clinical terms, it's like a patient who's bleeding badly. You've got to stop that bleeding first. Now, turning to the one last question, this was a big old ratio analysis study. They give you a balance sheet right here, assets, liabilities, and they give you an income statement. And then what you'll do is the first thing you'll do is a common size analysis. And we're getting kind of used to that now. So you know how to do this. We divide every number by right there, and we lock that reference. If you want to know what I just did, just look up on YouTube locked references in Excel, and you'll save yourself tons of time in the future. And you can see there's that formula. We'll do it over there. I'm not going to do the whole thing, and we'll lock that reference as well. But I just want to start using it so that we can illustrate certain things. We can even add a simple point change from last year from last year to this year, and you can see what things are moving a lot. Most things here aren't moving that much up in the balance sheet, but let's go down and start doing this for the income statement, see if there's anything interesting there. Same thing, we divide every line by total support and revenue right there, and we'll copy that down, and then we'll do the same here, and divide it by there. And already I see something pretty interesting. We'll borrow those formulas again here. We'll bring them down here to look at the changes. But you see gigantic changes. There was a huge change in the proportion of all of our revenues coming from contributions. Last year it was only 7%. This year it's 60%. And there was a gigantic drop in what we were getting from bequests. Last year it was 91% of all of our money, and it was a gigantic number. It was 32 million, and this year it's down to 2 million. So you can see as a percentage, this dropped drastically. So it looks from what I'm seeing, at least on the income side, we had a big bequest or a big grant last year, and then we lost it. And this year we've been scrambling. We're increasing our contributions. You see we doubled them, so we're scrambling to get money the old-fashioned way, I guess, through contributions. Now, scrolling down, after you've done your common size analysis, we can start to look at some of the ratios. And again, all these numbers are, you can see these numbers are primed for you in the example worksheet, so that way you don't have to re-enter all the numbers. The numbers in green are entered for you, and these are just referring to the numbers up there. So you don't have to, you can even see that formula right there where it comes from. It comes from the numbers up here on your balance sheet. So the numbers are all laid out for you. All you have to do is compute the ratios. So we'll do one pair so you get used to how this is done. You just divide that by that, and you get 58.2. You do it over here, the same formula, but using the different cells. So you can see that this current ratio went from last year, it was at 38, and this year is at 52. And remember, this is one of those ratios where you really want it above 100%. So we're still not good, but the only bright side here is that we're better than we were last year. We're still in dire straits in terms of our ability to meet current liabilities. Now we'll do one more ratio to see if there's other interesting stories or interesting ways to look at things. Let's look at the days cash on hand right there and there. Now that shouldn't be percentage. Let's fix that. So there you go. You can see that our days cash on hand went from 11 last year right there to 110. So that was a gigantic increase. And remember, days cash on hand relates to your burn rate. Your burn rate there on the denominator, that's how much cash you need on a daily basis just to keep the doors open. So that's your burn rate on the bottom, and you're dividing that by you're dividing your cash by that, and that basically tells you how many days you can go if the cash in stops. Last year you were on a razor thin margin right there. You only had 11 days cash, which meant that any hiccup in your cash flows and you were not going to be able to make payroll. Whereas this year you're on a much more solid footing. You're at 110. So that's movement in a good direction. Now, to help you get ready for one of the other assignments, how did you get there? So how much of this change was because you can see your cash went up? How much of this change was because your cash went up? And how much was it because, holy cow, look at that burn rate. That's your daily burn rate. Your daily burn rate last year was almost 100,000 per day, and now it's down to 20,000 per day. So your daily burn rate is cut drastically. Now there's a few ways to assess that. Now one is just to look at the percentage change. So we can say equals this year minus last year divided by last year. That's your percentage change. That went down 82%, and this went up 82%. So that went, it's kind of, it looks like they probably have a roughly equal impact on how you moved from 11 to 110, because each one of them went in a good direction about the same amount. This about doubled. your cash about doubled and your expenses really plummeted. Another way to visualize this, so this is something that might come in handy in your next assignment. Another way to visualize this would be to say, okay, well, let's say that even if your cash stayed the same, we didn't increase our cash at all, but we managed to drop our burn rate down to 17, what would happen? And we can do that math just by dividing last year's cash by this year's burn rate, and we get 60. So you can see that we already moved from 11 to 60 just by reducing your burn rate from 95 to 110. And the 60 is about halfway there. So indeed, that tells you that it's more confirmation that about half of the motion from the 10 basically to the 110 was due to your much lower burn rate, and the other half was because you fortified your cash. Now, on the one hand, I appreciate that this is getting a little bit into the weeds as far as the mechanics of the calculation. On the other hand, one of the helpful things about going through this is that hopefully you'll get some instincts that there's more than one way to solve a problem when the things, like if days cash on hand was critically low, and it was indeed critically low, a lot of people, the knee-jerk response is days cash, because cash is in there, cash is the problem, we need more cash. When indeed half of the problem was that daily burn rate instead. So, like I said, I know it's a little bit into the weeds, but knowing a little bit about the ratios lets you see that there's multiple ways to solve a lot of the problems.